Hello and welcome to this tutorial series about how to use the new integration of HDR Light Studio with the Maxwell Render Studio environment utilizing the Fire Preview render engine. My name is Jason Moranto and I'll be your guide on this short series. Primarily we're going to be focusing on how to utilize this in Studio, and the reason why is because even though the Fire Preview engine is available in selected plugins for different host apps, primarily right now Rhino, 3D Studio Max, Maya, and a few others, we don't have access to the HDR Light Studio currently in those plugins. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if it does make its way into those plugins. However, currently the only way to use this integration is in the Studio environment. So I do recommend that if you want to follow along, that you work in the Studio environment. Now we're going to start with a new blank document. And this is my current default setup for how I set up my window layout. And you can see here I have a default layout. Now you may or may not have custom layouts that you've made. I have a bunch. I'll be switching between these, but this is my default layout. It pretty much has everything on it. Now these are where you would find all the different windows. If you don't have a particular window open that I'm working in, then feel free to go to Window and then launch any one of these windows in order to be able to work with it. Like I said, we're going to start with a new blank document. We're going to keep it real simple so that you can focus on how this new tool works with your workflow. And it's really a very, very cool tool. So I'm just going to go up here to File. I'm going to go to Library, and I'm going to get one of the objects, primitives, that we would normally have with our Maxwell install. These all come free with your Maxwell install. And I'm going to start with the knot because it's an interesting shape that just gives us a little bit of variety to work with. I'm going to say Import, and I'm just going to click on it like so, and I'm going to pull up like so. Now, if I go to coordinates, you'll see that right now it's set to 0.476. I'm just going to set it to 0.5 just to make it right on that horizon. Click off like so, and now it's fine. So we can just click in an empty spot here in our objects palette, and that will close that out. And I can hold down the Alt key and navigate around. I can zoom in and I can pan around. So even though I'm not in a camera mode yet, I can kind of begin to frame up how I want to see this. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to kind of frame this up and get to a place where I think it looks interesting. Something like that. That looks interesting to me, maybe more like so. I'm going to go ahead and right click and I'm going to say New Camera. And what's going to happen is we're going to end up with a new camera. Now, if I go down here to Cameras and I open up the Cameras tab, you'll see there's my camera. And if I go to the camera parameters, go to Type, you'll see this is a 3D camera. And here is all of our coordinates for that camera. And here are our optics for that camera. Now, if you notice at the top of our viewport right now, it still says perspective. We need to change that to camera so that we can actually be working within the camera. Now, we can change any of our coordinates utilizing the numerical values over here, or we can simply navigate like we would in Studio by holding down Alt and clicking and dragging to rotate, and clicking with the right button to zoom in and zoom out, and clicking with the middle button to pan. So I'm just going to go ahead and navigate around a little bit nicer, something more interesting like so. And now I'm going to go ahead and right click and say Focus to, and I'm just going to click like so that it focuses right there on that spot on the knot. Now if we go back to our camera, you'll see that our coordinate system has changed and everything's set up appropriately for this. This little red indicator that you see here with our focus widget, this is telling us that that part is out of focus, but that's okay because that's in the far distance. I'm going to go ahead and shut down coordinates, and I'm going to look at the optics for a second. If we go down here to sensor, you can see that our sensor resolution is 640 by 480. And I know that our focal length needs to be something like about 43 in order for that to give us a normal focal. So I'm just going to go ahead and click like so. And that's just going to give us a slightly better perspective for this object at this particular aspect ratio. I'm also going to click Lock Exposure, and I'm going to set the exposure for something around 8, which I find to be a good value to begin working with these HDR Light Studio files. Other than that, I don't think I need to do too much in the Cameras tab. I think I can just go ahead and close all those. I don't need to worry about having my camera selected, although it doesn't hurt anything to have that selected. And I just want to go over to my object parameters. And I just want to check to make sure that everything is good here. So I'm just going to check my appearance. My smoothing looks good. I don't think I need to do any smoothing on this particular object. We've already got a UV set, so we can apply some materials. We don't need to do any triangle groups. So we're good to go as far as this object goes. If you have different objects, then you might want to check that. We're going to go ahead and look at materials now. I'm going to go to the materials browser, and I'm going to get a car paint material that I happen to have. This is part of my RAW library, which I give with my training videos for VTC for free. So I'm just going to find something that looks kind of like what I would think a car paint looks like these days. So I'm going to grab this bluish green here, color 5021, and I'm going to drag this. Now notice here that I have my cameras tab still selected, so I just need to go over here to my materials tab and drag this to my materials tab. Now I can drag a bunch of materials here, and I might just do that just for the sake of having some various different things to look at when we're doing our comparative. So maybe I'll do a hot pink, and that way we can see a couple different car paints. So I'm just going to go over here and drag this up on top of our object, the knot. And there we go. Now it's been applied to that knot. And I'm just going to click off in the empty space to deselect that. In this particular instance, I'm having a little bit of OpenGL issues, so you can only see that bluish color here on a small amount of the background, but that's not important. It's still there, and we know it's there. So I'm going to go over to the Environments tab now. And currently we have Physical Sky set, but I want to change it for IBL. And with the IBL I want to use for disabled, set that to none. Before I do anything, I want to go ahead and on each of these tabs, and there's 4 of them total, I want to enable HDR Light Studio, just like so. What that's going to do is it's going to say that HDR Light Studio is giving its information for the background, the reflection, the refraction, and the illumination. Now, I don't need to keep those open. I can go ahead and minimize those now. And before I do anything as far as working with the HDR Light Studio, I'm going to switch over to the interactive preview, and I'm going to hit the fire button. Now it's going to tell me that the render process cannot continue to check the studio console for details. Now the reason why it's telling us that is because even though we've set all this for the HDR Light Studio, like so, it hasn't actually enabled the HDR Light Studio. So how do we enable the HDR Light Studio so that we can begin to do our rendering? Well, this little button right here where it says HDR Light Studio is what we're going to click on. Now, when you do this, don't be shocked. We're going to end up with a whole new interface. There we go. So that's the HDR Light Studio interface, and it sits on top of our Maxwell Studio interface. We can just kind of slide it out of the way if we need to see what's going on here. And of course, all of these are completely customizable as far as Maxwell is concerned, so we can manipulate our workspace as much as we need. Ideally, this would work best on a dual monitor setup. So now that we've done that, I usually start by just going ahead and clicking one of these primitives up here. That's going to give us a round synthetic. Now notice that we have 2 things going here. We have a round synthetic and we have a default background set for on. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit the fire. It's going to ask us for an output file. And I'm going to say live and fast preview and hit save. And there we go. It's just as simple as that. You've started your Fire Render engine and we've begun to work in HDR Light Studio. We'll pick this up in the next video so that you can learn more about the interface of HDR Light Studio and how these things will feed back into the Fire system for Maxwell Render.